In our last timeline video, we took a look at how Rúben Amorim saved Sporting, a club that was almost bankrupt. Players had left for free, the fans were turning on the players, and he managed to turn that into a title win for the first time in 19 years. We covered everything from Marco Silva's sacking in 2014 all the way to the Alcochete attacks in 2018 and finally to Rúben Amorim's title win in 2021. In this second part of the timeline, we're going to be taking a look at seasons 21 to 22, 22-23 and 23-24. We're going to see how Rúben Amorim transformed Sporting, in most people's eyes, from a fluke title into a powerhouse that competed on the biggest stage against big European opposition. If you do like these type of videos, please let me know. And, if you want to see a different timeline, maybe like a Jose Mourinho to Porto and how he won the Champions League, something like that. Or, Benfica's dominance in like the 2015, how like the opposite of how Sporting was in that time. Let me know. I enjoy making these timeline videos. It's also good for me to learn some stuff that I didn't even know about. One, my own club, but also the League of Portugal. As well for Man United fans who are watching this, getting excited, hopefully, give you a bit more of an insight of to how Amorim managed to, in this part of the video, and this part of the timeline anyway, to deal with conflicts when he had his first big conflict, media pressure, player pressure, everything in between. We will take a look at that. So if you do like this style of content, please subscribe, like and comment below. Without any further ado, let's get into where we left off. So where did we leave off? Rúben Amorim promoted so many youngsters to the first team, including Gonzalo Inacio, Nuno Mendes, Thiago Tomás and Eduardo Quaresma, just to name a few. And he managed to win the first title in Sporting for 19 years. Now, the new season has started and questions are being asked already about Amorim and Sporting. Was it a fluke title win? Can Rúben Amorim do it with fans in the stadium? Would players be able to respond to the fans? The last time the fans of Sporting players got in a bit of a tussle, of course, Alcochete attacks. And the fans at the time were very toxic, can't deny. So people were worried about how that would relate to the players. And Rúben Amorim, of course, Rúben Amorim was sort of protected almost by the COVID season, not hearing the fan backlash in the stadiums if things were to go wrong. But also just to see if Rúben Amorim and the players could replicate what they did last season. So let me take you to the transfer window first. Transfers in the 21-22 season. The important signings are, of course, Manuel Ugarte from Famalicão for 6.5 million for 50% of his sell-on fee. Marcus Edwards from Vitória de Guimarães, who was 7.57 million, with 50% being owed to Tottenham. Basically, it was supposed to be owed to Tottenham already, but Tottenham, Sporting and Vitória agreed to carry that on to Sporting's deal. So now if Sporting sell Edwards, they will be getting 50% of that. Well, in this part of the video anyway. And Islam Slimani came in January with Marcus Edwards as a free transfer. And you want to keep a note on that one for later. Another one you want to keep a note on for later is Ruben Vinagre, a left back on loan with an option to buy from Wolverhampton after a fantastic season at Famalicão. But again, like I said, if you guess why I'm telling you to keep an eye on him and to remember the name, it's probably not going to go well. If you already know the story, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But in terms of going well, Pablo Sarabia, I wish I put him on like the important signings list, but because those three, one of them is instrumental to the first season, he wasn't including in important signings because technically he was only a loan, so that's why I've put him there. Mateus Reis transfer was made permanent as well. Ricardo Ezegaio was someone who Amorim worked with at Braga and was a former Sporting Youth Academy product as well, was brought back to the club. And you've got guys like Gonzalo Esteves, João Virginia, who came in. Jenny Jalgula and Flavio Nuzinho were promoted from the B team as well. Sporting spent a total of 33.25 million euros that summer and January combined. Now let's talk about the departures then. Sporting made a total of 16.67 million euros, with the worst one, not the worst one, but the most, painful one for me, Nuno Mendes leaving on transfer deadline day for 7 million loan fee, but PSG had an option of, an obligation actually of 40 million euros to buy, which would be activated the following summer. Thiago Tomás was loaned out to Stuttgart as he wasn't getting a lot of game time. And João Mario would end his loan with Sporting. And although Sporting tried to sign him to a new sort of deal and get him back from Inter Milan at the time, João Mario refused and actually would end up joining arch rivals Benfica. Which was sad for me because the season before, of course, I bought a João Mario jersey and then I had to, throw it in the bin. If I still have the video, I'll put it on screen for you now. But yeah, it was a tough time for Sam. Other sales included Luis Maximiano, who was the backup goalkeeper to Redan for 5 million euros, Misic, who was brought in by Bruno de Carvalho's era for €2 million he was sold for. Eduardo Enrique was loaned out, as was Valentin Rossier, Jovan Cabral, Thiago Ilori, Rafael Camacho. Eduardo Quaresma from last season was loaned out, to get some more maturity, from Rúben Amorim's own words. Luis Felipe was also loaned out as well. And Tunes, the GOAT, the left back, someone Amorim brought in for experience, was let go on a free transfer, and he signed for his boyhood club Paços de Ferreira, and a few other free transfers such as Lemore, Bruno Gaspar, and also JoãoPereira, the current Sporting manager, would retire at the end of the last season. And this would be the team for most of the year, apart from one position. So let me read out the starting lineup. You've got Adan in goal, Ignacio, Fidal, but Fidal was sort of coming to the end of his tenure with Sporting. He was dealing with a lot more injuries, so he didn't play as many as the games he would have liked. We had guys like Luis Neto have to fill his position at some points as well. Sebastian Coates was the captain, so his spot was cemented in that back three. You got Pedro Porro, Mateus Nunes, and João Palhinha. João Palhinha would actually rotate a bit more with Manuel Ugarte, especially towards the end of December, November. Ugarte would become more of a prominent feature in the Sporting squad. You've got Pedro Gonçalves, Pablo Sarabia, and record signing Paulinho up front. Now, you might have said you've missed one. It's Rúben Vinagre. Rúben Vinagre, in theory, was brought in to be the left-back starter. But this is where I guess is a good place to start the timeline. First, let me talk to you about the Supertaça. So Supertaça is just a community shield in Portugal, is where the league winners face the winners of the cup, which was Sporting versus Sporting Braga. And Sporting actually went 1-0 down thanks to a Fran Sergio goal, but Jovan Cabral and Pedro Gonçalves made it 2-1, which means Sporting lifted the Supertaça. I don't really count Supertaça or community shields as trophies, but some people do, and it is important to, I guess, the overall rebuild at the moment. So that is another trophy in Rúben Amorim's cabinet. And Sporting would actually start off the league with 3 wins in a row, including a good win, a 2-1 win away against Braga, and also beating Belenenses SAD 2-0. However, straight away in August, points were dropped in 2 consecutive game weeks. One to famous bogey team of Sporting Famalicão, which at that point Sporting had never beat them in any competition, and a draw to FC Porto as well, another 1-1. But there was still room to be excited for a Sporting fan. We are back in the Champions League, and we've been dealt a decent enough group. We had Ajax, Borussia Dortmund, and Besiktas in our group. And our first trip, Amorim's first his first entire Champions League game, not just in Sporting but in his career, was against Erik ten Hag's Ajax. How do you think that game went? If you guessed 5-1 to Ajax, unfortunately you would be correct. Sporting were dominated at home, and Sebastian Haller would actually score a poker, and Paulinho's consolation goal wasn't enough, unfortunately. But the reason I single out this game is due to one man for Ajax, and that is Antony. This game made him look like, the reason Man United paid that much money for him. He was incredible. He was absolutely tearing the left back apart, and was, the left back had a horrible time, and yeah, Antony just absolutely destroyed him. Who was that left back, you ask? Glad you asked. Rúben Vinagre. Now, it's very unfair of me just to blame the loss solely on Rúben Vinagre, but he was awful in that game. He was subbed off at half-time with the score already 3-1. So it showed Rúben Amorim did not have a lot of confidence in Rúben Vinagre at all. And the following game week in the Champions League, Sporting would lose thanks to a Donyell Malen winner in Germany, losing 1-0 to Borussia Dortmund. But this is where things got interesting. This is where the team really found their feet. After that 5-1 loss against Ajax, you thought maybe the Sporting fans would boo, maybe they'd get a bit toxic. But you know what? They actually stood up and clapped. They sung even though they were being, absolutely battered at home. And some people took this as a sign of weakness, as a sign of Sporting are just happy just showing up. But it was really support for Amorim and the team, something that we'd never done really before, even under Jorge Jesus when we were playing well and we would still lose, or we'd go on a good streak and we'd lose one game. We would turn on the players like that. So it always was a new era for the Sporting fans in that sense of actually backing and supporting the team. And it did get divided across social media and across Portuguese news, but a lot of the Sporting fans had the same mentality of, look, we're going to support the team until, the end. And Sporting rewarded that faith very well. Sporting has to fly to Istanbul to face Besiktas in the Champions League, and Sporting would dominate them 4-1 with a brace from Sebastian Coates, Pablo Sarabia scoring a penalty and Paulinho scoring an absolute banger as well, making it 4-1 to Sporting. And on the return leg in the next match day of the Champions League, Sporting beat them at home 4-0 as well, thanks to a brace from Pedro Gonçalves, a goal from Paulinho, and a Sarabia goal as well. So it all leads down to the second to last game week, the penultimate game week of the Champions League, a game that I was so lucky to go to. Sporting had to beat Borussia Dortmund by 2 goals to qualify to the next round of the Champions League. Ajax were already top, but whoever won this game by more than 2 goals would go into the next round of the Champions League. So what do you think happened? Well, Sporting won 3-1 thanks to a brace from Pedro Gonçalves and a goal from Pedro Porro. It was a great game to see. I'll put a clip up of me reacting to initially the penalty miss and then Pedro Porro converting the rebound as well. Absolutely crazy as a fan that I got to witness such a historic moment, because that was actually the time that Sporting winning that game got them into the round of 16 for the first time in 11 years, which is crazy. So another record broken by Rúben Amorim. And you know what? We lost the next game against Ajax 4-2, which was in the league phase, but both teams had nothing to play for. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, but Erik ten Hag got another one over Rúben Amorim. Funny how life works out. And by this point in the league, Sporting were still unbeaten. The last time they dropped points was on the 11th of September 2021. From then on, they beat teams like Benfica, Vitória Guimarães, Tondela, Boa Vista, Gil Vicente and Portimonense. And then January rolled around. Sporting's first game in January in the league was against Santa Clara in Ponta Delgada, so it really should have been an easy victory. Unfortunately, Sporting would lose 3-2 to the club from the Azores. And whilst they beat Vizela in the next game 2-0, the next game after that was against SD Braga, Rúben Amorim's former club, and Sporting lost thanks to a 90th minute winner from Gorby, 97th minute winner to make Braga win 2-1 at the Alvalade. And looking at it at face value, you might say, well, they only lost 2 games for the season. They dropped a few points, fair enough, to Maritimo and Porto early on in the season, but they've only lost twice. They can't be too bad, right? But if you look at Porto's form, come February, they had still not lost a game in the league. They beat Benfica as well. They beat Braga. They beat Vitória Guimarães. They beat Boa Vista, Tondela. They beat pretty much everyone. And the only time they dropped points up to that point was against Maritimo, Sporting, and Sporting again. And then eventually dropping another point to Gil Vicente as they drew as well. Their first loss, Porto's first loss, came on the 25th of April 2022. But fear not, it's not all doom and gloom, because although Porto are doing very well, Benfica are struggling. They spent 100 million euros in the transfer market and were currently in 3rd place. But they did have a final against Sporting in the Taça da Liga or Allianz Cup. But luckily for Sporting and Rúben Amorim, Sporting were the victors. Despite being 1-0 down thanks to an Everton goal, Gonzalo Inácio and star hero Pablo Sarabia would score, making it 2-1 to Sporting. What is even funnier, you may ask? João Mario's reasoning for leaving Sporting was to win more trophies. On his first attempt, he lost one against Sporting. Also, it was a great record for Rúben Amorim. He won the Allianz Cup at Braga 2 years ago, won one with Sporting 1 year ago, and won another one this time with Sporting, meaning he won 3 Taça da Liga's Allianz Cups in a row, which is just a fantastic achievement for any coach. Something he was not able to do, however, was to beat Porto in the semi-finals at the Taça de Portugal over 2 legs. They lost the first leg 2-1 and then lost the second leg 1-0. Now, back to a key man in this story, Ruben Vinagre. Now, he's not really been seen, he's not really played a lot of games for Sporting since that horrendous display at Ajax. In fact, he would only make 18 appearances in all competitions, only totaling 866 minutes for Sporting. But on the bright side, Sporting just have a loan with an option to buy. So they just send him back to Wolves, and that is how that story ends. Is what I wish happened. What actually happened was there was a clause in the loan agreement between Sporting and Wolverhampton. If Sporting made the round of 16 of the Champions League, the deal would become permanent at a whopping 10 million euros, which 50% of the next future sale had to go to Wolverhampton as well. At that time, it was the second most expensive signing in Sporting history, just behind Paulinho. And speaking of the Champions League round of 16, Sporting were originally drawn against Juventus, and many Sporting fans had a big hope that maybe we could beat Juventus, as they didn't seem like their former selves and that former powerhouse glory team of the yesteryears, the last 5 or so years. They were becoming a bit of an older team. They weren't playing as well, and Sporting were licking their lips because they thought maybe we could get a result. But hold that thought, because there was actually an interference or something wrong with the draw, so they had to redraw in the entire Champions League group. And of course, Sporting ended up facing Manchester City, and that was not a good time for Sporting. In the Alvalade at home, Sporting lost 5-0 to Manchester City, which made even worse by the fact that Bernardo Silva managed to score a brace, of course being a Benfica player and a Benfica massive fan as well. It should be said that in the second leg, we actually held them to a draw at the Etihad, but when you look at who they were playing, they weren't really using a lot of first team players. They brought on Scott Carson for a 50-minute cameo, and he still managed to make a save on Paulinho. So, Pep wasn't really taking that one seriously. But there was still room to be impressed. Sporting made it out of the group. We had a massive big win over Borussia Dortmund. We beat Besiktas by 8 goals. We scored 8 goals against Besiktas even. So it was room to be impressed. And hopefully it was just something to build on for next season. Let me take you to the 2nd of February 2022, where Sporting had just beat Belenenses Sad 4-1. And in came new signings, Islam Slimani and Marcus Edwards. Now, Islam Slimani is a club legend and a club hero at Sporting. Despite never winning a league title, he was a prolific goalscorer for the Lions. In fact, throughout his career, he made the most appearances for Sporting, 123 in total, scoring 61 goals and getting 16 assists, playing nearly 8,000 minutes for Sporting. So when he was brought back in as a backup to Paulinho, people were actually very excited. Paulinho wasn't performing at his best, and he'd only scored 14 goals that season in 46 appearances. So Slimani coming in was seen as a good addition, and also a good addition just for Federico Varandas, who was running for presidency that year as well. And maybe getting him in would get some more voters on his side. With the return of a club legend, return of a hero to potentially win a league title. So there were many avenues for this sort of signing, this free transfer as well. It didn't cost us anything. And on his return, Islam Slimani was very prolific off the bench. In 9 appearances, scoring 4 goals and getting 1 assist. And many times he actually had to play alongside Paulinho, as Slimani was the main striker and Amorim moved Paulinho out into the wings. But for whatever reason, despite Islam Slimani's good form, Paulinho would never be dropped, and Slimani was once again relegated to a bench option. This did not sit well with Islam Slimani, and he stormed out of training according to all the newspaper reports at the time. Amorim even confirmed it in a press conference saying that he wasn't happy that he was being benched in the next game, so he wasn't training properly and stormed off. Islam Slimani denied this claim, saying that as he was a practicing Muslim, he was actually going through Ramadan, meaning he couldn't drink or eat during the hours of sunlight, meaning his training performance was off. However, this did not sit well with Rúben Amorim, and he was dropped completely from the team against Tondela, only returning in the next game against Benfica, coming off the bench in a 31-minute cameo on the 17th of April, where Sporting would actually lose 2-0. He was not picked for the remaining 4 games of the league and never played for Sporting again. Slimani actually responded to someone on Twitter asking him what went wrong at Sporting. He responded with the following: "It happened to be that Rúben Amorim didn't like that I was performing well and being forced to take away his player," that being Paulinho. "So he found excuses, but all the truths will appear soon." That was tweeted on the 26th of August 2022. And 3 years later, no one still really knows what happened. You've got Slimani's versions of events, you've got Amorim's version of events, and also what the tabloids think. But no one will really ever know unless one of these guys comes out and says it again. Islam Slimani is currently playing in his home country in Algeria, because Rúben Amorim has moved to Manchester United. So maybe we'll never find out what happens. Maybe when Islam Slimani retires, maybe he might come across and do an interview or something. But from what we know, they just had a falling out. And this was Rúben Amorim's sort of first big falling out as well. He had a few with Mathieu. Mathieu didn't want to wear something that he was supposed to be trained with, supposed to like track your heart rate and monitor stuff. He fell out with Rúben Amorim for a bit, but they got sort of reconciled and got back together in the team. And Ristovski was someone that Amorim just dropped completely, and he was let go. But someone who wasn't of importance to the squad. No disrespect to Stefan Ristovski, I loved you as a player, but not as someone on the level as like a Slimani, a club legend. He was brought in by Varandas as his big promise that, you know, he's going to be Paulinho's backup. He's going to be a striker. He's a club legend. He's being brought in. So Varandas looks a bit better too. Bring in someone who really should have come home a bit earlier with the bad spell at Leicester, Newcastle, and Lyon. I think he did well, maybe at Monaco, maybe another club. But there were so many clubs that he could have just said no to and come back. And there was always that rumour about Slimani. So when it did happen, it just didn't work out, which was unfortunate for all parties, because I think if it did work out, I don't think Sporting still win the league this season, but you never know. Slimani could score a few more goals, or he'd still be a part of the team, who knows. But unfortunately, Sporting would not win the league title. They would not go back-to-back. But I will say they did manage to get the exact same number of points as the season before, 85 points. But Porto, it must be said, were phenomenal under Sergio Conceição, getting 91 points that season, something that's never been replicated. They were just phenomenal, only losing one game all season to Sporting Braga, and that was only on the 22nd of April. So really, they could have had 94 points if they don't drop that game, but it is what it is. Porto were by far the better team. They still could not beat Sporting, however. I guess that's a sort of silver lining there, and Sporting did end up with the trophy anyway. So to recap the 22-21 season, Sporting finished second in the league. They finished the semi-finals of the Taça de Portugal, the winners of the Allianz Cup, the winners of the Supertaça, round of 16 of the Champions League, and the top goal scorer in all competitions was actually the loan move of Pablo Sarabia, scoring 21 goals in all competitions. And although it wasn't a season of another title, Sporting was still building on foundations. They still had 85 points, like I mentioned, the same point tally as last year. You had good promising young players still progressing, like Gonzalo Inacio, guys like Mateus Nunes, Ugarte was coming in playing very well, Marcus Edwards is brought in playing very well, Pablo Sarabia might stay, might be brought in from Sporting, who knows. So there was been some solid foundations there to build, and hopefully in the next season, Rúben Amorim wanted to build it even further and challenge again for a title, but also do even better in the Champions League. So it is the start of a new season. Amorim has some foundations to build on, but with a new season means a new kit. Seamless transition, I know. So this time I'm actually going to go with the transfers out first. And the reason for this is because it was an absolute culling of the squad. So many key players left under Rúben Amorim this season, including the following. Mateus Nunes was sold to Wolverhampton for 47.4 million euros. He was the key man in midfield, and he would arguably have a breakout season the season before under Rúben Amorim, scoring against Benfica and playing very well in the Champions League. Pep Guardiola saying he's one of the best midfielders in the world at that point in the game of the 5-0 loss to Man City. Another one, his defensive midfield partner, JoãoPereira, was sold to Fulham for 24.9 million euros. It was actually supposed to be him and Mateus Nunes going to Wolves together as part of some sort of package deal, but it turns out they couldn't agree a fee with Sporting and with JoãoPereira, so he went to Fulham instead. And in January, Pedro Porro was loaned to Spurs with a loan option, with a loan fee of 5 million, with an obligation to buy for 40 million. Of course, Sporting only saw the 5 million euro fee as part of the loan. So yeah, 3 massive players, arguably our 2 best midfielders and our best right back, were all sold this season. Other sales as well, Gonzalo Plata sold for 10 million euros, Bruno Tabata, Valentin Rossier, Sporar were all sold, Pedro Mendes was sold for a fee as well. Other key players of seasons past, Fadal was actually let go on a free transfer. He had a lot of injury problems, so he was let go. Slimani, of course, as we talked about before, was sold as well on a free transfer. You got guys going out on loan. Ruben Vinagre, a 10 million euro signing, of course, from last year, was loaned out to, I believe this season was Everton. Eduardo Quaresma was loaned out to Hoffenheim. Gonzalo Esteves to Estoril, and then a few others in there as well. And the big one being Pablo Sarabia ending his loan. He was not returning back to Sporting. He would actually sign, of course, for Wolverhampton Wanderers, because, you know, they all sign players from Portuguese league and players who do well in the Portuguese league. So he actually moved to Wolverhampton. Sporting generated a total of 101 million euros from player sales, which was a record at the time. And to be fair, the money we got from Mateus Nunes and Pedro Porro is fair. I still think we probably should have got a bit more for JoãoPereira, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. And the replacements. So we take a look at the signings. In 45.7 million euros spent, Jeremiah St. Just came in for 10 million euros. He had shoulder surgery, so missed the last season in the Bundesliga. Didn't actually play that many games and arrived injured as well, so didn't start the season with Sporting. Ousmane Diomande was brought in January and became a solid centre-back, straight off the bat. He was very good in a Mafra's game against Benfica, which actually led Amorim and the scouts to finding out about Diomande and striking a deal with Midtjylland, which he was actually on loan from. So he joined Sporting as well. Trincao came in from Barcelona with a loan with an obligation to buy. The obligation being if Sporting did not get relegated, they would owe Barcelona 10 million euros. And of course, Sporting did not get relegated. Other signings, of course, we mentioned Rúben Amorim was made official for 10 million euros. We have got the replacement for Matheus Nunes, Sotiris Alexandrodopoulos. So the story with Matheus Nunes, he was actually sold the day before a massive game against FC Porto. So he didn't actually get to play in that game. And as well as Morita being a good player who was also brought in, he wasn't a ball carrier like Matheus Nunes. He didn't have the speed and the attributes of someone like Matheus Nunes. So it was all panic buys, and that's why Sotiris was brought in for 4 million from, I believe, Panathinaikos. Hidemasa Morita was brought in from Santa Clara and is a fantastic midfielder for 3.45 million euros. Other signings came in within the league. Artur Gomez from Estoril for 2.9 million euros. Rochinha came in for Vitória Guimarães for 2 million euros. Vital came from Ghana for 1.2 million euros. And in January, Hector Bellerin joined the club as well as the Pedro Porro replacement. Franco Israel was brought in as a backup goalkeeper from Juventus, and a free signing of Tanlongo, as well as promoted youngsters like Jose Marsa and Schmidti. So let me show you what the team is or was. Goal, you've got Adan, you've got Inacio, you've got Mateus Reis at centre-back. With Fadal leaving, he would become sort of the main centre-back, swapping in and out with Luis Neto. Sebastian Coates, still the captain. Nuno Santos moved back to left-back. Pedro Porro at right-back. Morita, Ugarte, Edwards, Pedro Gonçalves, and Paulinho. So that was what it was at the start of the season. However, come January, the lineup would look a little different. It would be Adan, Inacio, Diomande, Coates, Nuno Santos, Ugarte, Morita, Hector Bellerin or Ricardo Esgaio, but mostly Hector Bellerin for the second half of the season, Marcus Edwards, Paulinho, and Pedro Gonçalves. Trincao would swap with Edwards most of the season, but would also play alongside him when Pedro Gonçalves was moved to the middle if Morita was injured or suspended. Same with Ugarte. Pedro Gonçalves actually moved back to a centre mid role because of Sotiris Alexandrodopoulos not actually adapting to Portugal or to the squad itself. There's one man I've not really talked about this entire video yet, but he was actually so important to, one, the title winning season, and also last season. That is Daniel Bragança. And with Matheus Nunes leaving, it looked like this could be the season for Dani Bragança to finally lock down a starting spot and finally start to be one of the best players in the midfield terms anyway in the league. But unfortunately, in pre-season, he actually tore his ACL, meaning he's going to miss the entire season. And you do wonder if Bragança does not miss this entire season, do Sporting do a little bit better in the competition's front and just in all fronts? Because like I mentioned, Mauricio Ugarte to play pretty much every game. Sotiris wasn't ready to be a central midfielder in the system, nor was Tanlongo, who was brought in on a free. Mateus Fernandes was also trialled there as well, promoted youngster from the B team, but wasn't ready at that point. So it's Pedro Gonçalves moving into sort of a backup midfield role in this instance anyway. And the league did not get off to a great start. Despite being 2-1 up, Sporting would actually draw 3-3 Sporting Braga, with Abel Ruiz scoring in the 88th minute to steal a point for Braga. The next game, however, was a good win against Real with 3-0 victory. Goals from Pedro Gonçalves and Matheus Nunes made that victory sealed. But then, as aforementioned, Matheus Nunes was sold right before the game against Porto, and Porto absolutely dominated us. It was not made easier by a red card from Pedro Porro for handballing the ball off the line when it was pretty much an open goal, so he was sent off as well. But after a poor start to the season, Sporting were up against newly promoted team Chaves at home. So this really should be an easy victory. Sporting actually lost 2-0 and were dominated by Chaves, and it was a sign to come for the rest of the season. Before we get back into the league though, let me talk about the Champions League, because Sporting again had a pretty favourable group in my opinion. We were drawn with Tottenham Hotspur, Eintracht Frankfurt, who were the current holders of the Europa League, and Marseille, who are a very good team in France. So still not an easy group, don't get me wrong, but still a group that Sporting fans wanted to and thought they could progress out of. And the Champions League started very well indeed for Sporting. Away in Frankfurt, they beat the reigning holders of the Europa League 3-0, with goals from Marcus Edwards, Nuno Santos and Francisco Trincao. Things were even better next game at home as they faced an unbeaten Antonio Conte Spurs side. And thanks to a goal from Paulinho and a second sort of, not consolation goal because the game was already won, but a second goal from Artur Gomez on a great skill run sealed the win for Sporting, meaning we were at 6 points in our first 2 games in the Champions League. But this is unfortunately where the Champions League campaign falls apart. Dan, who was, a starter for 3 years at this point for Sporting, Mr. Reliable, didn't really make a lot of mistakes. He was horrendous in the game against Marseille. Not only did he have, quote, the worst goalkeeper performance ever, he also got sent off in that game as well, meaning Franco Israel had to make his makeshift debut as a replacement, and Sporting would actually lose to Marseille 4-1. But Sporting's luck did not improve. Ricardo Esgaio was actually sent off within 20 minutes of 2 yellow cards, and Marseille were going to win that game 2-0 as well, thanks to a Guendouzi penalty and Alexis Sanchez goal. However, Sporting was still in good room to qualify. We still had 6 points. We were level on points with Marseille, and we were going into a game against Tottenham, which Sporting actually drew. Again, another game I was there for, thanks to a Marcus Edwards solo goal. But the last game of the season, Sporting had to beat Frankfurt, or at least draw, to try and get into the next stage, because we beat Frankfurt on head-to-head, so we would actually go through if we were to draw. But unfortunately, despite being 1-0 up, Sporting lost 2-1 and would be knocked out of the Champions League group, because due to the other results, Marseille were drawing with Tottenham. It was 1-1, and this meant Marseille would go into the Europa League with 3rd place, and Frankfurt and Tottenham would go through. However, Marseille were unaware of this fact and tried to go up sort of more attacking, which led to a counter-attack from Harry Kane to score in the 95th minute to send Marseille out of the Champions League and make Sporting the 3rd place team, putting them through to the Europa League. So very lucky for Sporting indeed in this case anyway, but still unlucky for having a Dan, have a mental brain lapse in that Marseille game. A lot of Sporting fans still stood by him, but unfortunately it would not get better for a Dan. Let me take you to the Allianz Cup in Pedro Porro's last game for Sporting. Sporting would qualify for the final, facing FC Porto in that game as well. And in the first 10 minutes, a shot that should have been saved by a Dan from Stefan Istachio actually went through a Dan's hands, and Porto went 1-0 up. Things were not made easier by Paulinho getting 2 yellow cards in the space of 10 minutes, the second one for elbowing, and I say elbowing, Otavio in the face. So that was down to 10 men, and Porto would score again to make it 2-0, and Amorim would not be able to go a 4th time in a back-to-back Allianz Cup win. But I hear you, there's the Taça de Portugal, so Amorim still could have some success in that. Actually, Sporting lost 1-0 to Varzim in the 3rd round, which is the first round Sporting actually enter in, being, the established club in the league. Varzim were actually from the 3rd division, and Sporting ended up losing 1-0. And it's not like Sporting used a rotated team anyway. The only difference was really the goalkeeper. Franco Israel was in goal, but you still had guys like Mateus Reis, Morita, Nuno Santos, Marcus Edwards, Trincao, Paulinho, and Gonzalo Inacio all playing in that game as well. So Sporting at this point in January were out of the Taça de Liga, the Taça de Portugal, and out of the Champions League. Things to be made worse, of course, with the sale of Pedro Porro. Sporting starting right back, which meant Hector Bellerin came in for €1 million as a replacement. And unfortunately, the league form up until January was not great either. Sporting failed to win in 7 of their games up until that point. The ones I mentioned against Braga, Porto and Chaves, but they also lost 2-1 to Boavista, 1-0 to Aroca, 1-0 to Maritimo, and drew 2-2 to Benfica as well. Things would not get any better in the league, as Sporting would actually lose 2-1 to Porto again. And as much as I hate to blame the season just on one individual, Dan, at this point, was past his use-by date. The game against Marseille I mentioned, but he was also at fault for some of the Chaves goals, the Porto goals. He made so many mistakes this season. I don't know if it was lack of confidence or maybe he was hiding an injury, but he was really not up to scratch, and it was painful to watch as a Sporting fan. More painful to watch, though, was Amorim's insistence to keep playing him when Franco Israel, although an inexperienced keeper, felt like maybe he could have done a bit better in those scenarios if given the time. But Dan was stuck with, and even in January, Amorim didn't even go to the market to get a goalkeeper, which could have been a possibility as well. He stuck with Dan, and I think that was actually his undoing this season. There isn't much more to say about the league, so I'll wrap up this league portion first. Sporting finished 4th in the league, 4 points behind Sporting Braga and 3rd, 11 points off Porto in second, and 13 points off Benfica in first. And you might think, yeah, it is a poor season, let's just move on to the next one. It's actually not over yet, and there were some bright spots in a really awful season for Rúben Amorim. The Europa League. First off, Sporting were drawn into sort of the knockout round to try and get into the actual qualifying and like the round of 16 of the Europa League. And they faced Midtjylland. And unfortunately, the first result was a 1-1 draw, but Sporting in the away leg absolutely battered Midtjylland, winning 4-0 away from home. But things looked to be over before they even began, as in the next round, they were drawn against Arsenal, who are currently top of the Premier League at this point and showed no signs of slowing down. The bright side for Sporting is that they would have to come to the Alvalade first, and after some heroics from Paulinho and Jerry St. Just, they would only draw 2-2, which meant it was all to play for in the second leg. Again, a game which I went to, which is probably the best game I've ever been to. I've seen the best goal probably I will ever see. I'll tell my kids about that goal, man, if God willing I ever have any. But before I get too ahead myself, first off, I believe it was Granit Xhaka scoring the first goal, meaning Sporting were 1-0 down. And at that point, I thought we were going to get absolutely battered. But Pedro Gonçalves, from the halfway line, no less, chips Aaron Ramsdale to make it 1-1. The best goal I've ever seen live, no doubt about it. That guy's reaction was spot on. That's exactly how I was as well. It was crazy. And Sporting managed to take it to penalties, in which they would beat Arsenal and progress to the next round. Things would not get any easier for Sporting as they actually came up against Juventus and losing in the first leg in Turin 1-0. But unfortunately in the second leg they would score, but they would end up drawing 1-1, which meaning Juventus goes through on aggregate. So what really went wrong this season for Sporting? Let me try and explain what I think anyway. Of course you've got the main one, which was Adan in goal. You know, he was past it by this point. He was letting in so many goals, and that was definitely a cause for concern and probably the main point. The second point, as much as I love him, you know, the signed shirt is there. Paulinho has to take some blame. Not just Paulinho himself, but Amorim too. Paulinho was the only registered striker in the squad. You had Rodrigo Ribeiro, but he wasn't ready. And instead of, you know, going in the market to buy a striker, I guess Amorim was maybe scarred from Islam Slimani. So he decided to stick with Paulinho and actually promote Yusuf Chermiti from the B team. As much as Chermiti was actually good in terms of hold-up play and things like that, Chermiti wasn't up to Sporting standard. And he did score a few goals, but, you know, and at 18 years of age, fair enough, you know, he actually did pretty well. But at that point, when Sporting were trying to compete on all fronts, we really did need a second striker, someone that we could actually give Paulinho some competition, because Paulinho wasn't playing well, like I mentioned, in that season. Paulinho would only score 5 goals in the league in 22 appearances. As a main striker and as sort of the number one striker, you could see why this would be cause for concern. I will say, however, Paulinho was a big game player this season, scoring against Arsenal, as I mentioned before. He also scored against Porto as well. So it wasn't all doom and gloom, I guess, in that aspect. But in terms of his goals to game ratio in all competitions, 38 appearances, 15 goals, and 8 of them goals coming in the Allianz Cup against lower league opposition as well. To be fair, he did score against Braga in that same competition as well. But in terms of just overall league and performance progression, Paulinho just was not cutting it. And Amorim's insistence to, one, keep starting Paulinho and also not going into the market for either a goalkeeper or a striker was a big issue as well. And lastly, Matheus Nunes' sale. So this might not be one you think of maybe straight away because, you know, Morita's there, Ugarte's there. But selling a player like that before a crucial game against Porto, especially with Dani Bragança being out for the season with a torn ACL, you really gave Amorim no other options. Or Randes and Hugo Viana selling Matheus Nunes didn't really give Amorim any other options. Because as far as I know, Matheus Nunes' release clause wasn't hit. It was just a sale for that fee. I think his release was actually like 60 million or something. So yeah, it wasn't actually met. But Amorim lost him anyway because Randes and Hugo Viana decided to sell him. And then that's when they panicked and bought in guys like Sotiris and Rochinha, guys who came in but weren't fully scouted. They weren't like projects of Amorim. So they came in and they just weren't really good enough. And Sotiris really didn't get that much of a chance, to be honest. But obviously I don't know what goes down in training and stuff. So yeah, I think those were the big 3 reasons. Of course, maybe just in another one in general, which is Amorim refusing to change tactics in general, being very stubborn. This was probably his worst season in terms of trying to change everything, or trying not to change anything, I suppose, when things were going on. You can mention the sale as well of Pedro Porro in January, halfway through the season as well. I guess the season was done by that point anyway, but we still had Europa League to play. And bringing in Hector Bellerin and having someone like Ricardo Esgaio, who are serviceable players, but definitely not starters, also didn't help the cause as well. So to give a recap, they finished 4th in the league, the 3rd round of the Taça de Portugal, runners-up at the Taça de Liga, group stage of the Champions League, and the quarterfinals of the Europa League. The top goal scorer in all competitions was Mr. Reliable Pedro Gonçalves with 20 goals. So now it's a new season's questions are being asked of Sporting and Rúben Amorim. Is Rúben Amorim a one-season wonder? Was he lucky with the COVID season? Are Sporting back to their famous old ways of finishing many points behind Benfica and Porto? And it was time for Rúben Amorim to answer those questions. Firstly, let me start with the player outs again. We can take a look at a big money sale in Manuel Ugarte. The midfield powerhouse was sold to Paris Saint-Germain for 60 million euros, meaning there was a big hole in the midfield once again to be filled by someone else. Next up is Youssef Chermiti, someone who was brought in January by Rúben Amorim as the backup striker. Like I mentioned before, he was okay at holding up play and was a decent scorer for his age, but only scoring, I think, 5 goals in all competitions as well. He never looked like he was going to have a big future at Sporting. He was sold to Everton for 12.5 million euros. Thiago Tomas ended his loan journey of 2 consecutive loans and signed to Wolfsburg permanently. And other sales included Artur Gomez, who was bought in the season before. Fatawu was loaned out to Leicester. Jose Marsa was sold. A weird one, Hector Bellerin was released on a free transfer, or he only had a 6-month contract, whatever you believe. Some people thought he was a loan, but it was confirmed that he was actually bought from Barcelona, but only played like 3 months of football, had a photo shoot and then left. So that was a strange one. A lot of people left on free transfers from the Hugo Viana, Kaiser sort of Silas era, which is Idrissa Doumbia left on a free transfer. And that was a big wage filled up as well. And then some loans for development. You've got guys like Vinagre on loan. Jovan Corral was loaned out twice. His name is not there by mistake. He was first loaned out to Saltiana in Italy, then Olympiakos in Greece. Sotiris Alexandrodopoulos was loaned to Olympiakos. And guys like Rodrigo Ribeiro, Tanlongo and Rochinha were also loaned out as well. Tanlongo again to 2 clubs, first to Copenhagen, then to Rio Ave. The same with Ruben Vinagre, first being loaned out to Hull, then being loaned out to Hellas Verona. Sporting generated a total of 84.33 million that window. And now the players in. Sporting spent a total of 64.5 million, bringing in arguably the most important signing, Victor Gyökeres from Coventry for 24 million euros, beating the likes of Everton and West Ham for his signature, as well as Brighton activated their buyback clause on Victor Gyökeres, but Gyökeres actually chose to join Sporting. Morten Hjulmand came in from Lecce from Italy, 19.5 million euros. A big one coming back was Jenny from loan. He was loaned out consecutively to Vitória Guimarães and Marítimo. And this was, no one actually thought he might be in Rúben Amorim's plans, but he actually had a very good pre-season. So he was returned from loan and promoted to the main team as a wing-back. Ivan Fresneda was supposed to be the long-term replacement for Pedro Porro, coming in at 9 million euros from Real Valladolid. Foot Manager fans will know that he's a very good player and is supposed to be a very good player in the future. Trincão's signing was made official for 7 million euros. Kobe Condredi came in January as a backup centre midfielder. Rafael Pontello was a signing for the future at centre-back for 700k from Leixões. And Eduardo Quaresma was another one who returned from loan and was promoted to the main team after an unsuccessful loan at Hoffenheim where he only played 4 games all season. Diogo Pinto, Francisco Silva, Miguel Menino, Rafael Nel, Afonso Moreira and Thiago Mamadei Ferreira were all promoted from the B team to the main team as well. So already Rúben Amorim is righting wrongs from last season, getting in Victor Gyökeres, a striker that can compete with Paulinho. Morten Hjulmand is someone who can fill a void, not just of Manuel Ugarte, but also of Mateus Nunes with his ball progression, his leadership as well. So he's already learned from his mistakes last season. And this would be the team that Amorim would use for the majority of the season. Adan was in goal still after a horrible season Rúben Amorim stuck by him, so I guess he didn't learn all of his lessons from last season. Inacio, Diamonde and Coates were the back three. However, Coates, due to injury problems, would be rotated in and out of the squad for guys like Jerry St. Just when he was fit from injury, and guys like Mateus Reis and Luis Neto, as well as Eduardo Quaresma, as mentioned, coming back from loan as well. Nuno Santos and Jenny made the wing-backs. Jenny starting at wing-back, taking over from Pedro Porro, I suppose, and then also Esgaio and Hector Bellerin from last season. Midfield pivot of Hjulmand and Morita. On the wings, Trincao was preferred over Marcus Edwards. Pedro Gonçalves was Mr. Reliable, and of course, Victor Gyökeres started up front. Key players off the bench included Danny Bragança coming on for Morita or Hjulmand, Marcus Edwards coming off the bench for Trincao or Pedro Gonçalves, Paulinho coming off the bench for Gyökeres, and Franco Israel would claim his spot eventually and take over from Adan. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. But the season nearly started in disaster. On the first game of the season, Sporting were 2-0 up against Vizela thanks to a Gyökeres brace. But unfortunately, a mistake from, you guessed it, Adan meant Vizela came back for 2-2. But luckily for Sporting, there was a hero. In the 98th minute, Paulinho came in off the bench and scored the winner, meaning Sporting won 3-2. And the next two consecutive games, Sporting would beat Casapia and then beat Famalicão 1-0. And would you believe it? Once not a prolific goal scorer, but actually this season, Paulinho in his first 4 games had scored 5 goals. All of them being winners. Of course, I mentioned Vizela earlier, but he scored the winner against Casapia and also the winner against Famalicão. Sporting's first tumble would come at Braga, where they drew 1-1 to Sporting Braga. Gilot scoring the equaliser, even though Pedro Gonçalves actually scored the first goal. What was weird about this game, Hjulmand scored a goal, but it was given offside because I believe it was Pedro Gonçalves or someone was in the way of the Braga goalkeeper. So it was a very rare goal to see disallowed, but it was disallowed nonetheless, and Sporting ended up drawing that game regardless. But let's pause the league form there. Let's talk about the Europa League. Sporting finishing 4th last year means they went straight into the Europa League, and they got dealt in a group with Atalanta, the eventual winners, Sturm Graz and Rakow from Poland. Sporting started off the campaign with a 2-1 win against Sturm Graz, but unfortunately lost the next game 2-1 against Atalanta. A shocking result in Poland were 1-1 because Gyökeres got sent off in the first 8 minutes. But on the return leg, Sporting would beat them 2-1, drawing to Atlanta in the penultimate game of the group stage, but beating Sturm Graz 3-0, meaning they advanced to the knockout playoffs with 11 points, only losing 1 game and drawing 2. And let's get Rúben Amorim's other favourite competition out of the way, the Taça da Liga. Sporting managed to make it all the way to the semi-finals, but unfortunately they lost to Braga 1-0, thanks to an Abel Ruiz winner, which means Amorim would not get to win his favourite trophy again. Back to the league form, however, Sporting would win the 6 consecutive games in a row, but it was their first big test of the season. Sporting versus Benfica. Despite Sporting going 1-0 up thanks to Victor Gyökeres, David Neres and Kasper Tengstedt both scored in the 94th and 97th minute to give Benfica the win. It also should be noted Gonzalo Inacio was sent off in the second half after 2 yellow cards. Sporting played 40 minutes with 10 men. But the game after that, they came back with a 3-1 win versus Gil Vicente. And Vitória Guimarães was the next opponent, where unfortunately they lost again. Despite being 1-0 up thanks to Gonzalo Inacio, they would lose 3-2, with Dani Silva scoring the winner for Vitória Guimarães. This did not bode well for Sporting's next game, which was against FC Porto. Something that didn't bode well in this game either was injuries to Saint Just and Sebastian Coates, meaning the only 2 options at centre-back were Gonzalo Inacio and Diamonde. So Eduardo Quaresma came in for his first start. What was so surprising about Eduardo Quaresma starting? If we go back to the 8th of October in the game versus Aroca, he actually came on and was subbed off in the same game. He came off Ricardo Esgaio on the 58th minute and then was subbed off in the 89th minute for Luis Neto. So at this point, many people thought Eduardo Quaresma's career was over at Sporting. But he dropped a lifetime heroic performance, keeping Galeno, Evan Nilsson and Taremi quiet, not conceding a single goal and actually getting an assist on the goal, which was unfortunately ruled out for something I don't even know really why. The ref saw someone fall to the floor, blew a foul, whatever. But Quaresma was so good in that game. He was arguably the best centre-back on the pitch at that time. And it shows Amorim's faith in his man management that he was able to get that type of performance out of Quaresma after, that sort of brutal subbing on and subbing off. It's probably the worst thing you can have as a player, to be subbed on and be subbed off straight away. So, yeah, Eduardo Quaresma with a fantastic performance against Porto. And then after that, he started many other games in the league as well. In fact, in all competitions last season, he made 30 appearances. Considering the season before, he only made 4 at Hoffenheim. It was a step up for Eduardo Quaresma, and he did very well stepping into that position. And in the league, Sporting would then go on an 8-match winning streak, beating the likes of Portimonense, Estoril, Chaves, Vizela, Casapia, Braga and Moreirense. Beating Casapia 8-0 and Braga 5-0. Sporting were unstoppable. But let me take a quick break and go back to the Europa League, because it was around this time in February that Sporting were drawn against Young Boys and beat them in the first leg 3-1, drew to them in the second leg 1-1, and that meant they progressed into the next round of the round of 16. They were dealt a very bad hand as they came up against Atalanta, someone who already beat them in the league phase already, and then had to face them again in the round of 16. And Sporting at home held them to 1-1, but unfortunately lost 2-1 in the reverse leg, meaning they were out of the Europa League. It was at this point that something monumental had happened with the Sporting squad. Antonio Adan was out with injury and was ruled out for the rest of the season. This means that Franco Israel then came into the team and started for the rest of the season, becoming the number 1 in Sporting's team. And in 23 appearances that season for Sporting, he conceded 19 goals but keeping an impressive 9 clean sheets as well. But since Sporting were out of the Europa League, all focus was on the league. They drew 3-3 to Rio Ave, unfortunately taking their win streak of 6 to an end, but then went on an impressive run, beating Farense, Aroca, Boavista and Estrela de Amadora. The biggest test was against Benfica. In fact, Benfica beat them earlier as mentioned before, but this would be the pivotal point of Sporting's season. Benfica were hot on Sporting's heels, and if Sporting tripped up, Benfica would put themselves in a position to take that first place from Sporting. Someone who was Sporting's saviour in this game was Jenny Catamo. He scored in the first minute thanks to a great run from Pedro Gonçalves and a great finish from Jenny. As I mentioned before, Jenny only played a handful of games under his loan spells at Maritimo and Vitória Guimarães, not playing over 25 games in both seasons combined. However, he was preferred as Rúben Amorim's number 1 right wing back, and in this game, it showed why. Alexandre Bar would get the equaliser in the 45th minute, but in the 91st minute, Jenny Catamo scored an amazing volley to steal the game away from Benfica, and Sporting would win 2-1. And after that, Sporting would beat Gil Vicente 4-0, Famalicão 1-0, and Vitória de Guimarães 3-0. But they had another tough test with 4 games to go in the league against FC Porto. And FC Porto were taking no prisoners in this match. Evan Nilsson scored in the first 7 minutes, and Pepe scored in the 40th minute as well, meaning it was 2-0 to Porto at half time. But they forgot one thing. Victor Gyökeres is overpowered. He scored in the 87th and 88th minute in a quick counter-attack move from Sporting. And if not for Edwards not getting sent off in that same minute as well, who knows, Sporting might have actually taken the lead in that game anyway. But it doesn't really matter, because Sporting had 1 game to go. If they won this game and Benfica lost, Sporting would win the league. Sporting beat Portimonense 3-0, and Benfica actually lost to Famalicão, meaning Sporting would win their 2nd league title in 4 years under Rúben Amorim. But all was not that great though. Of course, winning the league title is very good, but there was one trophy that Rúben Amorim has never won being a coach in Portugal, and that was the Taça de Portugal. Sporting had been on a great run, beating lower league teams like Olivais and Moscavide, beating Dumeirense 8-0, beating Tondela 4-0, União de Ladeira 3-0, and also beating Benfica across 2 legs, beating them 2-1 in the first and drawing 2-2 in the second as well, which all led down to the final against Porto. But before I get ahead of myself, you know how I mentioned Adan was ruled out for the season? Well, after winning the league, Franco Israel was ruled out for the last 3 games of the season, including the 2 league games and also the final against Porto. So Diogo Pinto was someone who wasn't really expected to make the jump up to the first team at only 19 years of age, but he was brought in to be the main keeper for the last 2 league games and the Taça de Portugal final if Franco Israel was not ready in time. And Diogo Pinto did well. He kept a clean sheet versus Estoril and then kept another one against Chaves as well. So he was on good form heading into the game against Porto. But unfortunately, Taremi and Ivan Nilsson aren't on the same level as Estoril's or Chaves strikers. Sporting would go 1-0 up in the final thanks to a Jeremiah St. Just header. But shortly after, St. Just would actually get himself sent off for pulling down Pepe while he was through on goal. But again, Sporting held on. Ivan Nilsson actually did score in the 25th minute, but Sporting managed to hold on with 10 men in extra time. But unfortunately, in the 100th minute, Diogo Pinto gave away a penalty. A lack of experience rushing out and fouling Taremi, and that was the penalty, and that was scored by Taremi as well. And that was all she wrote. Unfortunately, Amorim could not add the Taça de Portugal to his trophy cabinet. But as last time, I showed you what went wrong. And I tell you in this time what went right. Firstly, righting the wrong of not having a backup or a striker that could compete with Paulinho. Viti Gyökeres is of course an anomaly. He's very good, probably one of the best strikers in the world at this moment in time. But how long would it have been if someone of Viti Gyökeres' calibre, even a backup striker, would have came in to give Paulinho some serious competition? It happened a little bit with Slimani, but Slimani fell out with Rúben Amorim, you know what happened there. But everyone was pretty much begging Rúben Amorim to bring in a striker to compete with Paulinho. And he finally did bring in Viti Gyökeres there. And Viti Gyökeres paid for his fee and then some. Not only winning the league, but of course also qualifying for the Champions League, which gets Sporting a nice little bit of change as well. Secondly, would you believe it? Righting another wrong. Franco Israel started, to be fair, through no fault of Adan. I guess if Adan was fit, he'd probably be still playing the rest of the games. But Franco Israel came on and was actually impressive in a lot of those games. Don't get me wrong, he's still very inexperienced, but that will come with time. That was his actual first professional season playing consecutively. In his last season, as I mentioned, was bang off the bench against Marseille and only had a handful of games. So to be playing that amount of games, and he actually did very well, keeping 9 clean sheets and also getting called up to the Uruguay squad as well, shows that maybe Amorim should have given an opportunity to Franco Israel a lot sooner. And again, righting more wrongs, buying replacements for players that leave. Hjulmand is again an anomaly, a very good midfielder and was a hefty midfielder brought in as well. So when he was brought in as Sporting's midfielder, he did actually replace Matheus Nunes and Manuel Ugarte. Something that was clearly planned for and scouted for a long time, not a panic buy like Roshinha or Sotiris Alexandrodopoulos. But also, it must be said, Amorim's man management was fantastic in this season. I mentioned about Eduardo Quaresma, but also Jenny Katamo being called back up and being given the opportunity by Rúben Amorim to prove himself and becoming the starting right back in the team as well. Of course, Diogo Pinto was called up to play the last few remaining games as well, but you also had debuts from Thiago Mamede Ferreira, Rafael Nel, just to name a few as well. So for the last time in this video of this timeline, let me recap the Sporting 23-24 season. They won the Portuguese League, they were the runners-up in the Taça de Portugal, their semi-finals of the Taça de Liga, round of 16 of the Europa League. The top goal scorer in all competitions was Viti Gyökeres with a whopping 43 goals. So overall, Rúben Amorim's timeline at Sporting, he won 2 league titles in 2020-2021 and 2023-2024. He won the League Cup, the Allianz Cup twice with Sporting in 2021 and 21-22. And finally, he was the winner of the Portuguese Supertaça in 21-22. He took a team that was 19 years removed from a title and delivered them 2 in 4 years. And for that, Rúben Amorim, I thank you. But yes, that is the end of this video. Please let me know what you thought of the entire timeline. Do you want to see more videos like this of different managers, maybe different players, maybe different teams? Please let me know what you thought. What do you think about Rúben Amorim's tenure in general? What do you think about that season that didn't go so well? Is that what worries you? Or maybe if you're a Man United fan watching that, if you're a Sporting fan watching this, what did you think of that season? Was I fair in all my criticisms? Did I miss any out? Please let me know. I've been Sam Fonseca. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time, and peace.